The man known as the Golden State
Well, the man
Killer.
charged in the brutal Delphi murder.
A stunning turn for the Menendez brothers.
David Berkowitz, indicted for murder.
Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of LA Legal. I'm Liana. This is Neama, of course, and today we are joined by one of Neema's friends, Ardalon Fakhimi, who is also a criminal defense attorney. So we've got a very loaded episode for you guys. Let's take it away.
Yeah, criminal defense attorneys, sometimes also criminal. So, yeah.
Well, what I meant was prosecutor, criminal defense attorney, but sure, let's go with that. Okay, guys, so let's take it away. Let's remind our viewers about who the Menendez brothers are, what happened back in 1996, and then we'll bring it back full circle.
Well, it actually happened in 1989, but you want to take it?
Yeah, so obviously, like, we're talking about one of the most gruesome murders, certainly that I remember in California state history. If you grow up in Southern California, and Ardalon is a Nevada kid, but you spend most of your life in California. I mean, everyone knows the Menendez brothers, right? They shot and killed their parents in the back of the head with a shotgun. Their father, Jose, 6 times. Their mother, Kitty, 10 times. Of course, they reloaded. They shot into their dead bodies.
It wasn't in the back of the head. It was in the front of the head, wasn't it?
I thought it was first in the back of the head while they were watching TV.
Oh, it might have been, yeah.
Yeah, and then they shot in the back of the head, the kneecaps. I mean, it was just
There was
brutal.
there was a lot of discharge of the fire.
Yeah.
And it was a shotgun.
It was pretty brutal. And if you're a kid in Southern California in the late 80s, early 90s, you're going to remember the Menendez brothers case. And we're still living it, 36 years later.
I feel like there's specific trials, like obviously OJ, there's certain ones that I feel like everybody has heard of, has watched, has talked about in some regard, and this is definitely one of them.
Yeah, there was 2 that I remember because I was at an age, like I'm not much younger. I'm a little younger than Erik Menendez. And so being around the same age as these guys that were arrested for doing this, it just sticks out in your mind. And of course, OJ, I remember exactly when and where I was during OJ because it was so bizarre with the car chase and everything.
Well, for me, it was their shopping spree on Rodeo. I feel like that's what's like when I think Menendez brothers, I remember, okay, they went on this crazy shopping spree. That's kind of what, got them caught. Are you getting another phone call?
I just want to make sure it's not anything. No, I'm good.
Can you guys please make this snippet?
You should see him on vacation.
I know.
I don't want to. I know. I've been
It's
there.
the same thing.
Okay. All right. Well, back to our podcast.
Let's go
But
back.
yes.
Okay. Going back to OJ, I think obviously very different cases, but a lot of people say that the DA's office in Gar City really were gunning for Erik and Lyle Menendez because of the OJ Simpson debacle. I mean, let's not forget, they were this close to being paroled, but they were almost put to death. This was a death penalty case
That's
originally.
right. That's right. I don't think I've seen anything this gruesome. I mean, I served some time at the public defender's office, and of course there you'd see all sorts of gruesome stuff. But as far as crimes against parents, and I've seen other ones, but just not this graphic, not this violent. And I don't remember the shopping spree at the time that it happened. It really came to my mind after I saw the documentaries and the movie and all that stuff, and I think that's really what did him in. But I think even if that didn't happen, even if there wasn't a shopping spree, I think they would have been prosecuted.
Oh, no question, yeah. And going back to the trials, right, and obviously I think people really care about what happened recently and last week, them being denied parole. But just doing a quick recap of the trials, they were tried separately, the juries hung, then the DA's office tried them together, and, one of the big criticisms was that a lot of the evidence of the sex abuse didn't come into the second trial. I understand how morally there's a justification, but legally, it's really hard to prove self-defense, even if you were sexually abused, when you're not at imminent risk of death or serious bodily injury. That's the standard under California law, to use deadly force and to shoot someone.
Well, let me ask you this. What is the significance of excluding all of that from a defense perspective?
It's huge. I mean, listen, after all, these cases are decided by juries, okay? Now, you can't look at how things happen today and judge what happened 30, 35 years ago with the way we treat things today. So sexual abuse really was not, especially by parents, that wasn't something that really people were talking about. It wasn't a prevalent issue that long ago. Today, it's become a lot more commonplace, unfortunately. It's just, there's a lot more focus on it. There's a lot more attention to it, and society is a lot more sensitive to it. I personally believe, and this is not just, defense attorney perspective, I think objectively speaking, to have excluded evidence in the retrial of sexual abuse was just an outrageous travesty of justice. There's a complete miscarriage of justice.
I saw that smile.
Here are my thoughts on it. Let me just be clear. By the way, I was on CNN last week when this all happened. Not to say like I'm bragging about CNN, but I was talking about the case and I was talking about the sexual abuse. And the other guest was like a family member who was involved in the documentary. And she got really upset at me. And Julia saw it. And she thought that I was somehow saying it was okay that these young boys at the time, well, young men, but really they were sexually abused while they were boys as well. It was okay that they were sexually abused. Sexual abuse is never okay, and certainly not at the hands of your father. But as a lawyer, I think there's a big difference in sexual abuse during the mitigation phase or penalty phase in a death penalty case. I think absolutely that should come in. But if it doesn't go to any of the elements of the crime or the defenses in the case, what real relevance does sex abuse have unless you're arguing that you somehow were justified in what you did? If it doesn't fit within the four corners of self-defense law, how relevant is it? And that's why I think on appeal, it kept getting affirmed, even though the judge let a lot of that not come in.
Well, a wise man once said that everything after but is bullshit. Yeah. And I think that's respectfully, that's what we have here. So what you really want to do is, listen, a lot of criminal cases, the way that a defense attorney might pursue them if there's nothing else is a jury nullification, right? It's how does a jury feel that these two young men's father was the architect of really horrendous lifelong sexual abuse of his boys, right? And so what effect would that have in the minds of the jury that's going to make a decision about whether they're guilty or innocent? And as far as, how imminent was it? Is there really a self-defense? Is there not? Well, the story, they were not even able to tell the story, right? So I think they should have at least been able to present evidence of the sexual abuse, because how that is presented will determine whether it was imminent or not and whether there really was self-defense or not. We can't assume that what we now know in hindsight, no, that wouldn't have worked. No, because if there's a defense attorney at the table who is creating a defense theory of the case, they're going to say, absolutely, it was imminent. If they did not do this, in their mind, there's
This is going to happen.
This is going to happen. It was not unreasonable for them to think that they're not going to die. And I just want to add one other thing. Their dad, let me put it in as polite a terms as I can, was a real piece of shit. The DA, who I was not a real big fan of on the first trial, she's been very emphatic and vocal in the documentary, saying that she searched everywhere to find somebody that might say one positive thing about him. And the only person she could find to say one positive comment was his own secretary. Nobody else. So that speaks volumes about the kind of character this person was. And let's not forget, and a lot of people say, oh, there are family members that say, no, there was no sexual abuse. That's BS. That never happened. We don't believe it. Let's not forget about, first of all, there was a letter where Erik had actually discussed this with a cousin, right? And after that, the dad was a record producer.
Yeah, as the president of RCA Records.
Yeah, and so one of the Menudo members,
Roy Rossello.
He said the same thing. So there is corroboration that this sort of thing was happening, and there was no link between his boys and Menudo band members, right? So this corroboration is very serious.
All that's true. I agree. I believe they were sexually abused. I believe a fair and just sentence would be for them to be paroled right now. I think if they were offered a deal today, it'd be a 25 to life deal, and they'd be out by now. But again, there's the but. It's not.
Here comes all the bullshit.
No, it's not self-defense. So that the judge did the right thing. If one of the brothers had moved out, one was about to move out, it's an objective standard. This is like a bar exam question, right? It's not subjective. It could be if it's an imperfect self-defense, but they're arguing perfect self-defense. They were acting reasonably under the circumstances. It's an objective standard. What they did was objectively unreasonable and not self-defense. Being raped is not a license to kill your rapist. That's just the bottom line.
Well, there is that. So I don't disagree with that entirely. It's different than a scenario where, for example, hypothetically, one of the boys had a pistol this didn't happen. I'm just saying if it were to have happened, if he had a pistol tucked in his waistband and father started sexual abusing and then he took the pistol out and opened fire and unloaded the entire gun, that's a very different scenario than what happened here. They thought about it, they reflected, they made a plan, they went to a gun shop, they tried to buy a gun, they had to use a fake ID, they were denied. It was a whole shit show. And there was a lot of time to reflect about what they're doing. So it wasn't one of those things that was like an immediate self-defense. It was thought out, and I think it was more a case where they said, no more. This is not going to happen again, and we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again. So there is that. And that is in contrast to how you see most self-defense cases go, or self-defenses goes, where...
I think the argument was, and I think we're going to want to talk about the parole, I think the argument was that if we outed our father, he would kill us. And that's how they're trying to make it an imminent threat to them.
Right.
The problem is, I think you can make the argument maybe with respect to Jose, much harder with respect to mom, Kitty.
Yeah,
and she might be her own piece of shit for allowing this to happen.
Yeah, but there's no self-defense as to mom. I have always said there's no... They basically said that there was no self-defense as to mom. It was more of a mercy killing. And so with that, and I think the parole board actually looked at that, and I don't think they're really supposed to be focusing on that. Once they were resentenced, the California youth offender laws and that program was to come into play, right? That was the whole purpose of the resentencing, because when they first got sentenced, they were sentenced to LWOP, which is life without parole. And on life without parole, you can't get, you're in for life, right? So if it's less than that, then you can get resentencing, after 25 years?
Yeah, half the time,
Half
right?
the time.
So, 50 to life ends up being 25.
Right.
Parole eligible.
But they're supposed to look at other things, if they are classified and are eligible under the California Youth Offender Program, then the parole board should be really focusing on other things other than the actual crime itself. What have they done to rehabilitate? What have they done in terms of education programs? And I think all the boxes were checked. They did all that stuff, and the parole board hung its hat partly or largely on prison infractions, things that they did. I had a cell phone, or, Erik was clean by his own account. He's been sober since 2013. So over 35 years of incarceration, they did quite a lot to improve themselves. I don't think there's just any dispute as to that. And so, but the parole board started hanging its hat with respect to the denial on things like, okay, there were infractions in prison, they minimize conduct, they think the rules don't apply to them. And how do you reconcile that with all the rehabilitation that they did? Lyle was like an institutional leader in the prison. They're mentoring people. They've gone to countless therapy, educational certificates, all this stuff. So there's a huge amount of things that they've done over the last 3 decades or more, yet they're nitpicking, and I think there's politics involved in a lot of this stuff as well, and what the public perception is and so on. But if they're nitpicking it, you have a cell phone violation, that's a minor infraction. Mm-hmm. You're putting 2 young people in what is really a broken system. Our prison systems are not ideal. It's a broken system. Then you expect stellar conduct in a broken environment. So this is why I think, and it's not game over. They got a 3-year denial.
3-year, which is the minimum under California. Look, I agree. There's basically 2 things they focused on. One is one broad category, the prison infractions, right? And for Erik, it was gang affiliation, drugs, cell phone violations primarily. For Lyle, no drugs or gangs, but
cell phone. It's much more minor than
well, in prison it's a big deal.
Yeah. No. Compared to Erik, he was much more.
He was more of a model.
Inmate.
I think the problem with Lyle was he had many cell phone violations as recently as last year, 2024.
Yeah, that's a problem.
So that was recent. That's after basically this whole process had started. And of course, it was Lyle who shot Kitty, right? I think that was the challenge. Erik shot Jose. And then the second was the lack of remorse, candor, acceptance of responsibility. Basically all the lies, right? And this is going back to the 90s. First saying that it was a mob hit, right? Then saying Jose had raped one of their girlfriends, right? There was never any acceptance of responsibility. I'm not saying that's necessary. I understand why they didn't really confess and say we did it because we wanted revenge or we were upset. Because they have the self-defense argument, right? You can't abandon that because for a while that habeas petition was the best argument they have. Look, I thought they were going to be paroled. And I'll go on record and saying I was wrong. And the reason I thought they were going to be paroled, they had all the momentum, right? You have universal family support, which obviously you do criminal defense work. I have never seen in a murder case where every single one of the surviving family members has come out in favor of release. Not even one saying they want the brothers in. 18 people testified at Erik Menendez's parole hearing. That's really unheard of. You don't have that. You have the Netflix series Monsters. The reality is the public support makes a huge difference. You got the family support. You got the public support. You got the celebrities. You got Kim K. You got Rosie O'Donnell talking about it. You have a judge overruling Nathan Hochman, the DA's objection to resentencing, right? Saying they've been model inmates. You have Governor Newsom ordering the comprehensive risk assessment before they're even parole eligible. That never happens, right? Because a psych's got to go into prison and say if they're low risk. I think they were low, then it was changed to moderate. But again, you have this evaluation done before they're even eligible. So I thought this would just be a mere formality, a little speed bump, but I was wrong.
Well, I mean, going back to your point about did they accept responsibility, did they show remorse? I mean, when? The question of that is when. So if it was close in time to the murders, or even thereafter, close in time to their defense, listen, you can't look at these things in a vacuum. You got to look at the totality of the circumstances. The fact is that these two boys were raised by a loathsome, nefarious scoundrel, and they are very much a product of his manner of parenting. And so when you have that, yes, you're not going to have acceptance of responsibility because they were not raised by a human being that ever accepted responsibility. If we learn a little bit about the dad, he truly was a piece of garbage. Maybe the family doesn't like hearing this stuff, or maybe they've acknowledged it because, once again, they could not find character witnesses to say that this dad was just a normal human being. He really was scum. And so what are you going to expect from the two kids that he raised? And so I think the acceptance of responsibility really should be more what happened far after their defenses, right? But again, under the youth offender program, I think they're supposed to be looking at a lot of other things, or at least focusing. Maybe they can consider a lot of it. But the parole board was, at least in, I believe it was in Erik's case, parole hearing, where the parole board talked about, at least to some extent, the murder of the mom. And,
of course.
Right? And that is a problem that a lot of people have because, again, it was a mercy killing.
Yeah.
So I actually want to mention something that you and I talked about in our, I think, most recent episode about Gypsy Rose. Do you remember? This was right before, and so we kind of segued into like the Menendez brothers are going to get paroled as well. And so in that episode, we sort of talked about, Gypsy Rose getting out. She wasn't really a risk to society. What she did was horrible. Of course, we're not justifying killing, but it was very similar here, right? These aren't like violent criminals, serial killers, right? They, as we discussed, committed a horrendous act against their parents. So how does that come into play, right? She gets paroled. Somewhat similar situation here. These guys don't. Is this politics? What do you guys think about that?
It's a little bit different, obviously, right? Gypsy Rose's boyfriend was the one who was the killer.
Sure.
She's certainly like a co-conspirator.
Co-conspirator.
And again, I believe the brothers were abused, okay? But I think Gypsy Rose's was clearly documented, right? What the mom was doing in a hospital setting, right? I believe that, the Roy Rossello declaration, I believe the letter 8 months before the murder, I believe that that's accurate. I know Hochman, the DA's office, challenges at least the letter. So I think it's a little bit of a different situation in terms of the documentation of the abuse. Look, I think the abuse is bad. Going back to the interview I did when the family member came after me, she's like, how do you think it feels like if you were forced to perform oral sex on your father at knife point? This is terrible stuff that we're talking about. Obviously, it's a different time as well. I think, again, if the Menendez brothers, this happened today, I think there would be a much more reasonable plea offer.
Yeah.
Well,
I think when a family member says stuff like that, there is no legal analysis going on because it's a layperson, right? They're looking at it simply from an emotional standpoint, fairness, is this right? And let's not forget, a lot of people have very strong feelings about this case, obviously. And like I've talked to DAs and I said, this is several months back before their parole hearing. And I remember one DA saying, he will lose all confidence in the justice system if they are paroled. They need to spend the rest of their lives in prison. And I said to him, you understand, it's not like they're getting off, right? They've been in prison for over 35 years. The best years of their lives have been spent locked up. My personal opinion, I think it's time. I mean, yes, they're gruesome murders, no question about it. But what are the chances of recidivism here? And by the way, it's not game over. I think there has to be an administrative review by law 11 months after the parole.
Yeah.
It's
denial.
not.
They got a 3-year denial, and then in 11 months they have to look at it again to see whether their decision was right, whether they can reduce the time for the next parole. I don't know. I don't have a huge amount of confidence because the criteria that they look at the 11-month review is basically the same considerations that they take into account during the parole hearing. And so if the parole board is sitting here looking at 35 years of prison history and saying, nope, you're not good enough for parole now, what's going to happen over the next 11 months? That they're going to say, oh, wow, you took another class? Okay, it's time to let you out.
It has to be changed circumstances, so it's not going to happen. I think it's going to be another 3 years. But let's talk about two things I think are important. One, you said is politics, right?
Yeah.
It's a whole political layer. Obviously, we're lawyers. We're talking about the law. But the Menendez Brothers case has been political. We talked about, post-OJ, right? The potentially political nature of the prosecution. But most recently, especially for people that live in LA County, you have our DA race back in November 2024, right? You have George Gascon, who I'm sure you love. A lot of people think he was soft on crime, like myself. And, shortly before the election, he begins this resentencing process. And it's important because resentencing can only be initiated by a prosecutor or a judge, right?
Yeah.
The defense can't. So he initiates it. Hochman wins, Nathan Hochman, and he tries to pull it back, right? So the whole thing is this political football between the two. And we've been talking about parole, but let's just bottom line it. Regardless of what the parole board decided last week, Gavin Newsom has the ultimate say.
I don't think he's going to do anything. You think he's going to?
No, I think he's not.
He's going to do nothing.
Of course he's not, because he's running for president.
That's right.
In 2028, and the last thing he wants to do is stick his neck out and say,
Right.
I was the guy that pardoned the Menendez brothers.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, maybe if the parole board recommended it, he would rubber stamp it to not stand in the way. But he's not going to overrule their decision when he has his eyes on the Oval Office.
I think the politics of it is the reason that they're denied on the first round. But I really believe in my heart of hearts that they are going to get released, just not on the first round, because there are politics on that. There's a flip side to that coin, right? And so I just don't think they were ready to do it this time. And I think it's a politically safe place to be, to say, nope, first round of parole is denied. But that doesn't mean in 3 years they're not going to go. And I think the 11-month administrative review that's coming up, that's not going to change anything. But then when they're up for parole again in 2028, I think it's plausible that they might get released. And they can always they can file something to advance it, right?
You can file the advance. You can appeal even to the Court of Appeal. There's an administrative process where you go to. I think there's only been one recently. It was, what was her name? One of the members of the Manson family, Van Houten, right? Where she was recommended parole.
Yeah.
Newsom said no. She went above, and the Court of Appeal actually overturned Newsom. It was very strange, and he decided not to appeal to the California Supreme Court. So it's its own sort of little administrative world. And people that really handle these types of cases, it's a niche practice.
Final question for you guys. How common is it for inmates like the Menendez brothers to get granted parole in California?
First time, very uncommon.
Yeah,
very uncommon. But look, I think what makes this case not uncommon, and the last thing I want to talk about, Ardalon, again, what makes this case unique is the Netflix series, right? It can completely change the course of a legal case. We saw it with Britney Spears, we saw it with R. Kelly. I mean, there's so many cases. It changes everything. Like, having a strong legal team is part of it, but you got to have a good PR team, and they have an excellent
public
team.
perception.
Public
probably the
perception's
most
yeah.
important thing that there is.
And these
For
cases
obvi-
gain momentum too, All it takes is Netflix or Hulu or whomever, and they create a documentary. And I feel like this is what brought this back on everyone's radar again, is the Netflix documentary.
Yeah, but I think the Netflix, again, it cuts both ways, because I think the Netflix documentary, I think the movie Monsters did not portray them in a very favorable light, right? If anything, there were many instances of these programs where you're looking at them and say, no, keep them locked up, right? So it's not one of these things where there's now a documentary or there's a movie where the entire public is going to jump on board and say, this is an outrage, they need to be released. That was not my takeaway when I saw both of those shows. So
Yeah, so it's interesting. Obviously, the Menendez Brothers happened a long time ago. It's in the back end, but we're seeing these documentaries more and more while the cases are happening. Now, obviously, this happened before the parole hearing, but for someone like, and Ardalon talked about, we're talking jury nullification. Obviously, defense attorneys love that. Someone like Luigi Mangione, obviously, different case, and then we're going to talk about it.
Huge
but,
nullification
yeah,
issues
huge,
there.
of course. Yeah, I mean, he's very, very.
Who likes an insurance company? Nobody.
He's one of the most well-liked
hate them the most,
assassins
probably.
that I've seen. Yeah, probably my entire life. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, any final thoughts?
I don't know. What do you think?
I think we're going to be talking about this for quite some time. And 2028, summer, when is that? That's going to be right in the middle of the next presidential election.
Yeah.
Is Trump going to violate the Constitution and go for round 3, or we're going to have someone else? So
You're either going to get a Harvard plug or a Trump plug with Neama. It's one or the other. I'm surprised it wasn't Harvard, but
yeah, but it's going to be, obviously, it's going to be interesting presidential election. Obviously, I'm joking. I don't think Trump's going to run, but it's going to be very...
You don't? Well, I mean, he's deploying National Guard all over for every big city in the country. Is that really to reduce crime, or is that a harbinger of things to come in terms of securing cities in case there's any violent outbreak?
here
I
we
don't need
go.
to.
Well, who knows? We may...
add another half an hour to this.
Yeah, well, we may be in Donovan prison in Ireland and I next to the Menendez brothers if this continues for the next few years. But no, it's going to be a big deal. I think it's going to be obviously like Vance or DeSantis or Rubio, one of those guys against Newsom. I think Newsom's probably one of the front runners for the Democratic Party. So I think this case is going to be a huge deal in 2028. And the story's just beginning.
My prediction: they're going to get paroled.
Okay. Well, stay tuned.
So you predict that they're going to be recommended parole, and Newsom, while he's running, is going to agree with the parole board's recommendation?
No, I didn't go that far. I didn't go. No, let me rephrase that. That's a good point. I believe they will be recommended for parole by the parole board.
Okay. I think Newsom, it's interesting from a statutory period. I think if they're recommended parole, I think the council, the parole, has 120 days to basically make sure there are no procedural or other problematic issues. Then Newsom only has 30 days to make a yay or nay on it. So the timing is going to be very, very important.
One thing to bear in mind is, would it be a good decision to try to put off the next parole hearing until after the presidential election, so that if there's a recommendation by the parole board for release, that politics doesn't come in and interfere and the request be denied. So I don't know if you can delay it, do you know?
I do not know if you can delay it. I don't think Newsom is going to approve the Menendez brothers' release until after the election.
I agree. It's too risky.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess we're going to have to come back to this in 2028 and see if you guys are right.
We'll see.
We'll see. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you so much. I hope
Thanks
you
for
had
having
fun.
me. Yes, it was great.
And we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.